las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno, y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
meeting. And if I can use the opportunity to just recap the discussions that we had yesterday, I think we had some very interesting and insightful discussions, presentations, and contributions. We discussed, education. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for my notes, which were right in front of me until just now. We discussed several issues, and I'm particularly pleased, having reviewed my notes last night, with some of the contributions that we received from our delegates, and there were a few that really stood out to me. Nicaragua's intervention about education being a right and the support that they had for keeping their schools open despite the challenges of the pandemic really jumped out at me. El Salvador's presentation that spoke about community education and the ability to deliver education to students even in remote areas, and some of the strategies that they have employed to ensure that education continues. We heard an intervention from Mexico, who indicated that they prioritized having education conveyed via TV and radio. Colombia, with their preloaded computers with particular software, so that that process is not interrupted. One of the presentations that really jumped out at me was a presentation from the delegate of the United States, who I suppose, living in this hemisphere, we look at the United States as easily the largest and wealthiest country in our hemisphere. And so when I learned that even the United States had an issue or had issues as it related to providing internet to students in remote and rural areas, it made me feel not so bad that we in Antigua and Barbuda, and perhaps some of us in our countries, having similar issues. So it is definitely a universal issue that is experienced by all countries despite their means. I also took note of the roadmap that the United States indicated they had for reopening of their schools, which prioritized 3 areas. The first being the health and safety of the students, the second being the communities, building around the communities, and the third being recuperating the learning loss, that had been experienced because of COVID. Barbados, I found, also had an interesting intervention when they spoke about producing indigenous digital content so that students can see and hear persons who look and sound like them in the content that is being delivered digitally, and also the decision they made to provide devices to a lot of their students. Colombia and the Dominican Republic also had some very good interventions, particularly in the Dominican Republic, who indicated that they have already distributed over 1 million devices. And so, colleagues, while it is not, my very brief review is not indicative of everything that was said yesterday, these are really the points that stood out to me and made me realize that as a region, as a hemisphere, we are doing tremendous, a lot of work, a lot of good work to ensure that our students continue to receive the education that they have that right to have. And so I wish to thank you for all of the interventions you made yesterday. I wish to thank you for sharing the experiences that you've had. And I'm quite certain that there are some of us on this forum that will take heed of your experiences and your examples and perhaps seek to implement in our own jurisdictions. So that is just my very brief, quick and dirty recap of the proceedings yesterday. We have much work to do today, though, and so I will not take any more of the time that we have earmarked for today's continuation of the third plenary session. The first topic for this meeting relates to the methodology for the process that has been implemented by the officers of the Inter-American Council of Education to build the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda. As we all witness, the forums for dialogue have established a very clear dynamic that has been strengthened and consolidated in the forum's successive versions. At the request for the CIE's officers, the Technical Secretariat prepared document 921 with a chronology of the process carried out since the last meeting of the Ministers of Education held in July of 2019. It describes through different stages the process of collectively building the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda. This document recaps the different stages already accomplished and propose the next 3 stages to confirm the priorities that will be covered in the Inter-American Education Agenda in its second phase, its elements and emerging needs, as well as to determine the actions needed to ensure educational continuity over the next 5 years. 1. Convening of a special virtual meeting of the CIA officers and working groups with authorities from the ministries of education in the region to discuss the draft document, to take place probably in January or February in 2022. 2. The formulation of the final document of the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda during the preparatory meeting of the Ministers of Education to be held in March of 2022. And 3. The adoption of the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda with a renewed focus on emerging needs in the current context of change during the meeting of the Ministers of Education to be held in April of 2022. With this said, colleagues, I open the floor to delegations wishing to offer comments or make proposals to the said document. And I believe the document was circulated previously, and so the floor is now open. And yes, I'm not seeing any delegations as yet, but the floor is open, colleagues. Do we have any delegations wishing to comment or to make a proposal for this said document? Am I correct in that there are no requests from the floor?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If so, I would like to propose that the committee formally adopt the methodology for the remaining steps to complete the task entrusted to it by the Ministers of Education to build the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda. And to do so, I submit for your consideration the draft resolution entitled Methodology for Building the Second Phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda, document 1121 of this meeting. If there are no objections, the draft resolution to adopt the methodology contained in document 921, developed by the CIA officers, will be adopted by this committee. Do I have your approval? There being no objections, it is so approved. Thank you very much, colleagues. I believe that the document is in fact quite thorough and will be an excellent piece of work that we seek to put forward. Having said all of that, we will now adjourn the third plenary session and move directly into. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I have a comment on the floor?
Yes, Colombia is requesting the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Colombia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Very grateful for the floor. I wanted simply to point out, really by way of reiterating what you have been stating, in terms of our methodology and what it becomes, what it means over 20 and 21. The Inter-American Commission on Education was very much involved in organizing a number of events, which from the standpoint of Colombia were unvarnished success. This was pointed out yesterday. And as we look back, at least from Colombia's perspective, on what we've done and where we are, we see very clearly what truly represents the most important, again, from Colombia's perspective, the most important issue before us. And that would be to continue our dialogue, to be sure to stay with it and be in touch with our colleagues. The question of being present and ensuring that over the coming year, we can also remember the question of disabilities, which a number of ministries were concerned with, as you well know, sir. And so I just wanted to say that Colombia is fully behind the idea of this set of meetings that are proposed for the coming year, including the preparatory meeting, of course, for the ministerial itself. So just to say that we hope that the planning of this second phase of the Inter-American program will continue to be deeply steeped in the collaborative emphasis that you and all of us have put on it up to now. And that will, of course, be the hallmark of our work through 2027. And remembering that the principle is to get there together is the principle, to stay together is the aim, and the overall objective is to be successful. I think this is at the very heart of the spirit of this committee, and that is what I believe and my colleagues believe will make a success of this program before us for the entire hemisphere. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. And I must state that over the past days, certainly all of yesterday and clearly going into today, your contributions have been sterling and I believe well appreciated by all of the delegates here. So thank you very much for that intervention, Colombia. I see a request from the floor from Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mexico considers that this methodology for the definition of the second part of our Inter-American Educational Program 2022-2027 looks good. And we think it's important also to be clear as to the priorities, the definitions and the priorities that we're going to aim for in the coming period with regard to the educational program and cooperation. Mexico is deeply committed with the efforts that will make it possible to meet the objectives of this agenda through our own Ministry of Public Education, implementing in a responsible manner and an adequate manner every one of the elements that we have discussed and have agreed to within this Inter-American educational program. Now, we agree that one of the main axes of this methodology has to do with the critical importance of ongoing dialogue. This is what will make it possible for us to keep abreast of what everybody else is doing, what we're thinking, and what our working methodology is, so that we can strengthen the educational goals of this educational Inter-American program so that we can indeed pull off the best results possible. That's the name of the game. Thank you.
Dialogue ongoing, and I really do appreciate your continued commitment. Thank you so much. I see Costa Rica has requested the floor. Costa Rica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Jesus. Good morning, all. Most respectfully, I wonder if I could request, sir, that perhaps Don Jesus could offer us a summary of the process that we've been working on, what the agenda is in its essence, so that all of us here have a better grip on what the dynamic has been. And as my colleague from Colombia said, so that we have a sharper focus on where we go from here. We see it written, but, and I hope that today's meeting, like yesterday's meeting, will go very smoothly. I'm sure it will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Costa Rica. Do we have any other persons requesting the floor to make an intervention?
Ministro,
no, I see no other hands being raised. I'm sorry?
Minister, just as Costa Rica request, I can do the presentation of the methodology, and maybe another countries will be enthusiastic to participate after my presentation, if you agree on that.
Sure, I have no difficulty with that. We do have the time, and so I believe that in the interest of a full understanding, it may be prudent for that to take place. So I turn the floor over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Minister. I will share the screen with, sorry, I'm going to switch to Spanish so that the interpreters could do the correct translation, interpretation. Voy a compartir la pantalla, voy a poner en pantalla.
I'm going to share the screen of the methodology document that we all do have, and this has been timely distributed. So all of the ministries of education of the hemisphere are in possession of this. And I do thank Costa Rica for the suggestion that the technical secretariat might offer a few remarks on the methodology. As the representative of Costa Rica said on the Inter-American Education Committee, this is an invaluable space because it brings all of the ministers of education together. That's a truly sterling opportunity to put our heads together and, as Mr. Esquivel said, see very clearly where we go from here. The document in and of itself not only seeks to summarize what has been occurring, what the most recent developments are in the Inter-American educational agenda, but also the first blush result of our summary of the different exchanges that we've had up to now. And you also see the links that go to the systematization of the process. I think this document, therefore, serves very much to inject additional meaning, at least from the standpoint of the technical secretariat of the CA, to see us indeed on our next leg of this journey. So you see set forth a sequence of the process since the last time the ministers of education met here in Washington in July of 2019 under the chairmanship of Antigua and Barbuda. And so this description of the methodology, you will recall, let me say in parentheses, when I was talking about policies, I said, and I would reiterate here, this is an ongoing process. This is something that is alive, that is moving forward, that is the result of ongoing construction and input from the ministers of education. And as Colombia has said repeatedly over the meeting, to adopt the methodology, which we just did through the draft resolution that was put before you and that you've adopted, tells us clearly where we stand. And this is directly linked to the 2015 meeting in Panama, when an Inter-American development educational agenda was adopted based on participation and prosperity. But this is absolutely a policy arena in which the ministers have an opportunity to really tap into what we have set forth in terms of mandates, development with inclusive and equity, the integral and comprehensive involvement of the key elements of these not only plural agendas, but the single agenda that has been adopted. Then in the ministerial in Bahamas of 2017, after this Inter-American Commission set up the Inter-American Educational Agenda, as you recall, 3 working groups were established, and that brings us to the plan of action that was adopted in February of 2017. That is the theme, building alliances and moving towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And I also would point out to the chair and to everyone, in the various meetings that we have had, consultations we have had before this 9th run the run-up to this 9th commission, I recall one comment made by Bahamas as to the working groups, another point that was made by Panama as to the issues, the various themes that were being addressed. And so I would like to take this opportunity, sir, to encourage those same delegations to feel free to reiterate those comments or tell us where they stand today, what further thinking perhaps has developed, anything that you all think would be valuable input for us in the technical secretariat as we move forward. And so, again, the role of the member states and all of the ministerials, and not least in this one, has led to the setting up of our work program in 2019-2022. And let me underscore the fact that until this meeting, this Inter-American Education Commission still has work to do in our work plan. It isn't that everything is done. Argentina asked us at one point, well, how are we on the work program? Are we done? The answer in brief is no. There are a number of things that are coming down the pike. There are a number of issues that the member states have broached. And when the delegation of Argentina raised this, I do believe it's because Argentina itself was encouraged to continue sharing in terms, for instance, of ongoing training, teacher training, and so forth in the coming sequence. So that is precisely the encounter we will have, the meeting we will have between ministers of labor and education when next Tuesday we have that training course under the ISO construct for internet issues. And so until 2022, we will certainly do our level best to implement the recommendations that are before us. But nowhere is it written that it ends at the end of 2022. That's not the plan. That's not, I don't believe either, and at any time the suggestion. This Inter-American Commission will certainly be the one in the driver's seat as to further developing the work plan and looking to see, obviously, where one stands at a particular point and what makes sense to take up from there. Now, this work plan, looking at it from the standpoint of how it was put together, focuses on three main issues: sharing concrete education for this Inter-American educational agenda, to leverage synergies at the global and regional educational issues, and to buttress the role of the Central Secretariat. And in the first plenary up to today, I do believe, we have, as a technical secretariat, done just that. We have focused on those three spheres of action, which we fully expect to continue to be front and center as we move forward in the coming months. And in terms of the shaping of public policy and regional policies, this is how we will see it. And those public policies, we believe, and the plan we've described, will allow us to speed up in terms of the overall goal, which is to meet the goals of the 2030 Sustainable Agenda. Now, in July and August of 2020, of course, we went into virtual mode, and certainly we were able to hold practically weekly meetings, by the way, and really took it step by step, building as we went. And that is where the idea arose that within the work plan, we should keep a space that would allow the ministries of education, I should say, to continue dialogue. That is where the hemispheric suggestion for continuity in education arose. And this, I believe, has been very useful. Why? Because it has allowed us to keep on the table suggestions that either had not been thought of at ministerial meetings or that had kind of been set aside. I mean, today, obviously, the pandemic, the COVID challenge wasn't on anybody's agenda. We know that, certainly. And so the question of continuity in education, I do believe, must incorporate, as the issue of the pandemic underscores, and writ large, the need to be flexible.
Lastly, the resolution from the General Assembly instructs the committee and we, as the technical secretariat, to continue to planning the second phase of the agenda, proposing these guidelines that you all have just approved. So as far as C, spaces for a dialogue and systemization and construction, based on the guidelines that have been laid out to implement the PTCIA, we decided to engage in different activities. We begin with the Global Forum for the future of education. You can see what was mentioned there, and then it lists the different dialogue exercises that have been held, the virtual space of dialogue and an exchange of experiences on inclusion and equity, the return to in-person learning, the discussion groups, the virtual discussion groups, and the sectoral ones, dialogues we had with education and health, education, etc. So now we move on to D, the methodology. These are the things that were mentioned as we were building this, and so we took another step. So we produced a conceptual paper about what was to happen at this meeting, and different members, the ministries put forward questions and just defined what we expected to achieve from this meeting, and so that we would come up with an agenda to allow us to continue to engage on this topic. We decided there was going to be a meeting, but that wasn't enough. And so in the portal of the Americas, the education portal, we created a virtual space for dialogue so that these issues continue to be discussed, and specialists, experts continue to share concerns, progress, etc. with regard to the proposed efforts. I remember the Ministry of Education of Chile said that it's possible to make a recommendation, but months after the beginning of the pandemic, we see that we have to correct our course. This is just a factor of life when it comes to implementation of public policies. It's wonderful to have these spaces, these opportunities to tweak and expand and correct, etc., the decisions that have been made, policy decisions. And the second part has to do with the dynamic of the dialogue process and the different shared experiences. For dialogue, we structured it in the following way. There was one in which we framed conversation. In this space, it was a country or group of countries that are led by officials who discuss their prior experience as defined in a conceptual paper. We're going to see the challenges that were faced as to frame the conversation, as the title of A is. B, we had a broader discussion, and not just have a group of officials who are discussing the topic. We decided to create groups or working groups to speed up the process so that more ministries of education could take part. So the participants divide up, those who are in this group divide up, and a timeline is set to deal with the questions, the seed questions, so to speak, and then we discuss lessons learned, challenges, and things that made a difference that each country has experienced. And then we moved on to conclusions. The meeting ended by presenting the different items addressed by the different discussion groups, and these conclusions were forwarded to the participants. And then the last step was unpacking it all, systematization, unpacking it all. So it's the Secretariat compiles it systematically. We go back to the countries to validate the breakdown of the essence and the different lessons learned and the next steps to be able to share these documents on systematization. And so the authorities who took part, as I said, review and validate the document. We hope, as Technical Secretariat, that this is a helpful input to the ministerial process. And it will, and we did all of this prior to this 9th regular meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Education. So this was based on the instructions we received from the CA. All of these methods that we've been following, indeed, we decided to divide it up into stages, as the chair explained. The first stage was the Global Forum, where we put the topics on the table for everyone. We dealt with education institutions with different visions, not only from the ministries of education. We negotiate the plan that's underway, and now we're till September of 2021 we reported, but we're going to be working on this until 2022. We systematize. In the third stage, that is, we discussed and validated with the ministries of education so that they rest assured that what's written there is what the ministries themselves had brought up. In the fourth stage, which is what we're doing here at this meeting, is distribution and consideration of the final proposals of the documents we drew up for the 9th regular meeting of the Inter-American Committee on Education. That's where we're at. And then what comes ahead are what has been approved just now in this resolution, to convene a special meeting so that the CA authorities and working groups of the authorities of the ministries of education of the region could discuss the proposed document of the second phase of the Inter-American Educational Agenda. So with that in mind, the Technical Secretariat, with the participation of all of you, what we're going to do is prepare the documents that are necessary so that the preparatory meeting for the 6th meeting, we're going to have a special meeting, and then the preparatory meeting will be consolidated, will solidify the document, and if we're able to get it approved so that all the different material that we hope that our ministries of education of the region are going to be able to provide, discuss it, and then this ushers in the second phase of the Inter-American Educational Agenda 2022-2027. So as I was mentioning, the document includes the executive summary. Right here you find the executive summary of the working groups, the return to classes, all the topics we talked about before, the common elements, the differing elements, trends, requests, conclusions, and next steps. So you can find links below so that you can see all of the detail that this executive summary provides in this little chart at the bottom of the document, and it's translated into the 4 languages of the OAS. So, and then towards a digital accessibility culture, the virtual dialogue space for exchange of experiences on inclusion, and the virtual working group on bilingualism, and then the intersectoral dialogue, education, health, building healthy school settings is the last executive summary. And you have the links. These are pending, that is, so they're not there yet, but we will complete these and make these hyperlinked eventually when these documents are in the 4 languages are ready. You'll be able to. But this will also be in the methodology document that is the subject right now of this item on the agenda at the meeting today. So that is the explication to discuss with the ministries of education. So Chair, you have the presentation right there. Thank you for the time you've provided me to do this, to refer to the document specifically.
Thank you, Director, and I believe timely as it was very thorough. I wish to state for the record that you and your team and the Secretariat have done a fantastic job in putting these recommendations together, and I see Argentina is requesting the floor. So Argentina, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Chairman, the head of the Department of Human Development and Education and Employment, thank you very much for giving us the floor. I don't know if you can hear me well. Yes. I would like to make a comment with regard to the putting together this agenda and the methodology that we're using, going to be following in this second stage. And Argentina has found very productive and useful the way in which it has been implemented, and we're very grateful to the Secretariat because you've done a wonderful job of unpacking or breaking down the essence of each one of the events. And we recognize that we'll try to it's a real task, and it requires teamwork to be able to accomplish this. And we know your team, Director, has been instrumental, Cecilia Martins, as well as the interns that have been aiding you in this effort. So we believe that even so, we can continue to add a value to this. And I believe if we all work together, all the countries, we can improve upon it. We can enhance it still. There's just a few items I'd like to bring up with regard to the forums and this dialogue spaces in the educational portal. And we've noticed that in Argentina itself, people who urge others to take part, they turn over because there's a change in administration or they move on to another position. So the point people whose job it is to disseminate the use of all of these platforms. And so we need to keep the list up to date of who are the contact people, who are the point people, to be able to make this effective. And to be able to engage in this dialogue, the technical dialogue, this is the only way. It's very of great interest and it's invaluable. And so I think to make it better, we need to do that, update the points of contact. And so this product, this output is just so rich, and it has so much potential to become hemisphere-wide projects. And otherwise, begin with pilot projects if it can't be hemisphere-wide. But I think that's invaluable. And I think to my country, it would be very worthwhile to leverage the relations that the OAS has with the observer countries, with other countries, other organizations, to perhaps make it possible for the topics we identify as priority could turn into hemisphere-wide projects, or perhaps not hemisphere-wide, but that perhaps you can secure more support for them to be successful. So I believe this is a fine way to follow this agenda, or that is to build this agenda for the second phase. And so we are committed to it, and we will make every effort to work together, and hope that other countries also provide input to energize this space. And we must, I just wanted to mention this and underscore this, and that's pretty much it. Just call upon the other countries to step up their efforts and uphold their commitment, because this space does deserve the effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Argentina. I agree with much of the sentiment that you just expressed. I see Colombia requesting the floor. Colombia, the floor is yours.
His microphone is on mute. Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for the efforts that have been made thus far. As the Director just presented, it's been important for Colombia, all of these spaces that have been created. And we want to state our backing of the phases, such as this virtual separate special meeting, as well as the subcommittee meetings to discuss the second phase of the Inter-American Educational Agenda. Also, at the Ministry of Education of Colombia, we'd like to confirm and reaffirm our participation in the preparatory meeting for the ministerial meetings of Ministers of Education in 2022, where we will define the document of for the second phase of the agenda. We believe that these spaces are fundamental, because here is where we can build and share experiences together. Based on these discussions that we've held thus far, and I believe that are going to take place in the future, in the next phase, we find it important for all these initiatives at the OAS to be brought into line with the discussions that take place in different countries with regard to the different particular needs of each country, to be able to provide a response through collaboration. I think this is the spirit of what we're trying to do. And likewise, I believe we have to be consistent in the second phase with what we've already done. There must be consistency. In the view of the Ministry of Education of Colombia, it's been so important to consolidate these different spaces to build this agenda, and that we can look at the different views from the different countries and what has been translated in no question into mutual enriching of each one another. And we haven't just come up with a cookie cutter, one size fits all way of approaching this, but rather we've resorted to each country to find out what each one is doing. And this has helped us all, without doubt, better outputs and products in our own countries. As our colleague of Argentina was saying, we believe that the participation in these spaces is so important, and we urge all countries to continue in this collaboration as we've been doing. And so the spaces of dialogue we've held thus far should continue with the leadership of the Inter-American Committee, the director who just spoke, and his team. We can coordinate this all, and this dialogue we've had can continue to take place and allow us to have a group discussion that will allow us to move forward towards improving education in each and every one of our countries. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Colombia. And, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that the work done by the Secretariat has been tremendous. But as was mentioned, it is not yet done. We still have a lot more work to do. And I believe in the first quarter of 2022, as was outlined, we have 2 preparatory meetings and then the meeting of the Ministers of Education that is scheduled for around March or April in 2022. I believe between now and then, more work will be done. And by the time we get to the meeting of the Ministers of Education in April, we will have a fantastic document that would be pleasing to all of us. Do I have any more requests for the floor? I see none. I see none. And so I would like to therefore formally, once again, submit this draft resolution entitled Methodology for Building the Second Phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda, document 1121 of this meeting, to be formally adopted by the committee. There being no objections, the document can be considered adopted. Thank you very much, Director, and thank you in particular to the delegations of Colombia, Mexico, and Argentina for your intervention and your contribution to the discussion. Having said that, I will now formally adjourn this particular session of the meeting, and we will go into the fourth plenary session, which is the election of CIE officers for the 2021-2024 term. In keeping with the provisions of Article 4 of the Rules of Procedure for the Inter-American Committee of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, approved in May of 2018, each Inter-American Committee of CD shall elect a chair and 2 vice chairs, who shall hold office for 3 years or until the next regular meeting of the committee. Their terms shall begin on the date of their election and shall last until the election of their successors. Esteemed colleagues, as we are informed, the candidature of Argentina was presented for the position of chair of the CIE. Likewise, the candidature of Ecuador was presented for the position of first vice chair of the CIE. At this time, and since we only have one candidate for each position, I propose to the members of this committee to proceed with electing Minister Jaime Perzik. I hope I got the pronunciation correctly, and please pardon me if I did not. Minister of Education of Argentina, of Chair of the CIE, and Minister Maria Brown Perez, Minister of Education of Ecuador, as the first vice chair of the CIE by acclamation. If there is no objection, it is so decided, and I wish to be the first to congratulate our incoming chair and vice chair for the committee. Congratulations, colleagues. I therefore, on behalf of this committee, wish the newly elected CIE officers for the period 2021 to 2024 much success as they lead our works to develop and implement the second phase of the Inter-American Education Agenda 2022 to 2027, amongst other matters. And at this point, I would like to invite our incoming chair from Argentina to perhaps give some remarks.
Minister,
yes.
I just received information that because we are expecting the Minister of Education of Argentina and the Minister of Education of Ecuador to be present in this meeting, they are scheduled to give us a message at 10:30 a.m. So maybe we could have a 30-minute coffee break.
Sure.
Until their agendas are available, and we can resume at 10:30 with their messages.
Absolutely. We are being very expeditious with time, and so we have a 30-minute break where we can have a quick recess. And I will ask each person to be punctual for the reconvening of this meeting at 10:30 Washington time. So until then, we will adjourn temporarily.
Thank you, Minister.
Luis, le podemos... Ya está.
Hello, colleagues.
Hola. Hola.
Good day, sir.
Buenos días, Ecuador.
Hola, buenos días.
Buenos días, ministra. Buenos días.
Buenos días, la ministra ya se une en unos pocos minutos.
De
Estamos
acuerdo.
probando el audio.
Vamos a iniciar al ratito primero con las palabras del presidente, que va a ser el ministro de Argentina, y después con la primera vicepresidencia, que es la ministra Brown.
Muchas gracias, Jesús. Buenos días. Solamente comentarte que la ministra tenía un evento y está un poquito retrasada. Entonces, yo no sé si es posible mover un poquito unos minutos, digamos, para darle tiempo a que ella se incorpore. Está más o menos a 5 minutos de retraso.
I'm sorry, Minister Matthew. She was saying that is it possible to move? The minister won't be able to be here right away, and so she's she's talking about. I'm doing this for your benefit, even though we haven't started yet, Minister. That's what they're talking about. I don't know if you're hearing their Spanish conversation about the minister from Ecuador isn't able to arrive. So, okay. You couldn't hear me? Oh.
So, and the Minister of Education of Argentina will be also ready at 10:30. So maybe we could start at 10:35 with the Minister of Education of Argentina, and then the Minister as President, and then the Minister Brown as first Vice President.
Absolutely.
Okay, we will adjust to 10:35.
A ver, ella debería estar aquí.
Thank you so much.
Señor Director, Mr. Chair, Argentina is requesting the floor.
This afternoon. Thank you, colleagues, for your patience in that 30-minute break. And as we resume the meeting, I wish to once again congratulate the incoming chair, Minister Jaime Persic, Minister of Education in Argentina, and I will now welcome him to take the floor to address us. Minister, good morning.
Hello, good morning. I think for everyone it's good morning, not good afternoon. For us, it's good morning. We just want to say to everyone that it is an honor for us to take on the chairmanship of the Inter-American Committee on Education. We do this so in representation of our country, even though it may sound redundant. This is not a matter that we take as something that's individual, but rather it's a responsibility of our country, the Republic of Argentina, toward the organization, or vis-a-vis the organization. And so we'd like to salute our colleague, the Minister of Education of our sister Republic of Ecuador, greet her, Maria Rompere, who we have been working with, and we've been deciding on some of the responsibilities with regard to the organization and all the countries. So we have a firm commitment, a staunch commitment, and we believe that this task that we're entrusted with is to work on behalf of education to the benefit of our region post-pandemic, which is at the same time as to leave behind the post-pandemic and bring back in-person learning in the school, so all the kids that left the educational system and were unable to learn what they were supposed to learn over these tough times we've gone through. At the same time, we have the responsibility of building the education of the future, and that future begins tomorrow. And for this purpose, we pledge to work in collaboration with all the countries and with my friend, my colleague, the Vice President, and we can all feel that what we've contributed to, something we've built, we've done so, and we can do it in a participatory fashion, in collaboration, listening to each other, and that our region can start to take stock of its present and its future. I believe that we need to repair, to build, to fix things to recover. And collectively, we believe that the times that are coming around is it's times of consensus, of sharing, and we are convinced and committed to the fact that all of our countries, even despite the drama we've experienced, it's worthwhile to share, to teach and make available to each other what we've done in this regard, each and every one. We believe that this is an important task in education to move out of the pandemic mode and to build a combined type of education, hybrid, both in person, must come back, and it's absolutely essential for socializing, for personal realization, social realization. It's an important, solid support to distance learning. We believe that it's very important to work forward towards teacher training and secondary education, to recognize degrees and diplomas when there's movement of teachers and students to other jurisdictions. That's something we have to work on. We have to build trust between each other. This is another achievement we have to address. This is an item. University educations where we have to come across this teacher training, mandatory education, secondary education. We have to incorporate into mandatory education levels environmental education. That's what should be incorporated. There's got to be training, and it's got to be a subject taught, environmental. So we being stewards of our common home and incorporating in education subjects which in some of our countries are provided for under the Constitution. For example, the right to land, the right to a healthy environment, to an environment. And this is something which is demanded by our young people, that this be. And the best school is a school that listens to students and echoes their concerns and responds to their concerns. We have to work on integrating as well research for the science of teaching, to finance common research projects, to learn to improve the teaching profession and the science of teaching for a better future. Perhaps in the distant future we will see the fruits of this, but we have to start this now. But and in collaboration with other international organizations, preparation for the workforce has to be included in students' curriculum. Specialized professions. This has to all be included in the university level and below. It's an honor, once again, I want to say and over the next 3 years, we hope to live up to these expectations, and we will collaborate, work closely together with everybody. We will lead this body along with the Minister of the Sister Republic of Ecuador on these topics or any other issues that may arise that are of interest to everyone, with the idea of producing for our region. We can systematize, produce, and learn from others, but also teach in a systematic way and show that there's been a wonderful effort of teachers and students and professors and communities and families, parents, with all the difficulties faced by the states. So, we are at your disposal for this purpose. We're grateful as well, and we'd like to recognize the chair of Antigua and Barbuda for the 3 prior years that it has held this position. And to wrap up, we recognize it's the great effort and everything that you've set the stage for the future and for these mechanisms of integration and solidarity so that they work properly and on an ongoing basis, permanently, to continue to build together. Thank you very much.
And I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. And one point that really stands out in my mind with your presentation is when you speak of a healthy environment being a fundamental right, and that this topic ought to be taught in our schools. I do believe that that vision is very timely at this point in time, where we are facing the threats of climate change, particularly as it impacts small island developing states like ours. And so thank you very much for putting that as a part of your vision and of your agenda. And I look forward to collaborating with you as you build out your program. Thank you once again, Minister. I will now turn the floor over to Minister Maria Brown Perez, the Minister of Education of Ecuador. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Good morning, Daryl Matthew, Minister of Education, Sports, and Creative Arts of Antigua and Barbuda. I'd like to join in with an expression of gratitude that my Argentine colleague has just expressed. The head of the Inter-American Committee on Education over these last years and everything you've built, and building this path forward that we should all, in a participatory fashion, that we should, and Jaime, Minister of Education of Argentina, and it's a privilege to serve with you with all the clarity of your remarks. I subscribe to it all, I endorse it, and authorities and delegations of the member states of the OAS and members of the Executive Secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Education, and of course all other officials who have helped to set up this important space. Our gratitude. We're here for a very important thing for our societies, and so we begin to set a new course for education in our region. And there's no doubt, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have fallen behind. But there's been a lot of lessons learned, and what's important, we've learned that we have to learn from our mistakes and learn from each other and in the spirit of multilateralism to build a better future for this and future generations, and strengthening our education system and realize what our weaknesses are so we can collectively build increased knowledge to go beyond that go beyond our borders. In Latin America, it's alarming in the world, or in the Caribbean and Latin America, how we've fared in this region. 60% of the children have fallen behind, and 13 million kids don't have access to distance learning. This is alarming in our region, what has happened as a result of the pandemic. So there's been a huge drop in performance, in student achievement. And so there's different realities in different countries in this regard, but what is encouraging, I think we have to urge you collaboration with critical thinking, and beyond our specific individual interests, we have to create the ability to turn our agreements into actions, concrete actions that have an impact throughout the region, and to bring about results, as the Minister of Argentina said. This is a crucial point in time in this post-COVID recovery, and we have to put together an agenda which contributes to close the gap between countries. And Guillermo Lasso Mendoza, on behalf of our president, we'd like to thank all the countries present here for attending this important meeting and for supporting us as vice chair of this Inter-American Committee on Education for the period of 2021 to 2023. Through our Ministry of Education, we seriously, earnestly take on this position to engage in inter-American ministerial dialogue, and to engage in appropriate multilateral efforts under the policies of the OAS with regard to partnership for development policies of the OAS. The educational policy of Ecuador is aligned with the OAS's policies to lead to social, cultural, and economic development of the people. So that's why we will work together with the Argentinian Republic as vice chair, together with the executive secretariat of the Inter-American Committee on Education and all the member countries, to discuss and promote actions in the framework of the Inter-American Education Agenda as a key tool to build more resilient education systems in our countries and ensure the right to education. As Ecuador's Minister of Education, it's my plan to support, enjoy, and listen, support everyone and bring about the return to in-person learning in our countries, and to expand digital learning, and to also address different issues that have emerged as well. So I staunchly believe that there will be no recovery without returning to classrooms, without creating the learning setting as a setting for growth and development. So this must be a safe setting for children who are in a situation of mobility, migrant children, and it can be very timely in this times of poverty for the most vulnerable people. And so we're gonna try to provide effective and flexible responses. Certain essential elements should guide the CA, which have been mentioned by the Minister of Argentina, and that we support, we endorse, and we ratify and reaffirm that these elements are essential. Recovery and reparation of post-pandemic mobility of students, and recognition in different countries as students and families move and also taking measures to counter the effects of climate change, and we have to have a healthy environment, as was referred to. Professional development of teachers that has to be coordinated between the two different countries of our region. The use of new technology to solidify the use of such technologies in a new digital era where education has already confronted and unexpectedly this pandemic, and now we have to build on this and leverage it. And so the relationship of education with employment, this will help us elevate these high poverty, alarming poverty levels, and also to research in the teaching field should be promoted as well. As the minister just said, that best practices from each country should be shared so that what is replicable can be shared in other countries, and we should systematically list all of these. This is all based on the belief that addressing challenges and taking advantage of opportunities will allow us to provide a response to common issues and the needs, satisfy the needs. One of the pillars for this is multilateralism. And lastly, I'd like to take advantage of this moment to thank the outgoing officials, officers, and all the contributions that have been made by the CA to Ecuador and the other countries, and we must support the needs of each one of the countries. I'm particularly honored to become the vice chair of the CA, and I trust in the commitment of our new team to achieve all of the goals that we have laid out for ourselves in the future. I reiterate my commitment, my government's commitment to education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I would just like to personally thank the government, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministers of Education for both Argentina and Ecuador for accepting the responsibility of providing some leadership, or the leadership, to this committee for the next 3-year cycle. When Antigua and Barbuda assumed the chair of the committee, the world was a very different place. There was no COVID-19. We did not have to struggle with issues surrounding remote learning, access to internet, access to devices. We did not have to face the challenge of getting our children back into school. We did not have to question whether or not the right to an education would have to be compromised based on the right to live and to a healthy environment. So the world in the last 3 years has changed dramatically. And you are now assuming the mantle of leadership at a time where your leadership will be even more required. The leadership that you will bring to this committee will be even more impactful. And many of our delegates who spoke previously spoke about continued dialogue. They spoke about shared experiences and how we can learn from each other. And I believe that you now, as you assume the role of leadership on this committee, would need to continue to encourage and continue to let nations engage and share best practices. And I commit myself and the government and people of Antigua and Barbuda to your support. If there is anything that we can do, we will do so. You have our full and firm commitment. So thank you very much for assuming the mantle of leadership at this difficult time in our history. Thank you. Colleagues, as we proceed, we still need to elect a second vice chair to support our incoming chair and our first vice chair, and encourage delegations to consider submitting nominations to serve on the committee, and in keeping with the rules of the Inter-American Committee. I'm sorry. Chair, can we pause for 30 seconds, please? 1 second. I'm sorry, something got stuck in my throat for a second. I had to get a drink of water. I was saying, we still need to elect a second vice chair to support our colleagues. And I would like to propose that the elections be held in the framework of the regular Inter-American Council for Integral Development meeting, or the meeting of the ministers, provided that the item is included on the meeting's agenda next year. Do we have anyone who is in objection of that position? I see no objection. So if there is no objection, it is decided that the election of the second vice chair will take place next year, provided that it can be included on the meeting's agenda. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my predecessor, Minister Jeffrey Leonard Lloyd, the former Minister of Education, Technical and Vocational Training in the Bahamas, for his leadership and his commitment, as well as the Ministries of Education of Argentina and Ecuador that will serve as chair and vice chairs of the Inter-American Communication on Education. They, along with the technical staff, the technical secretariat of the OAS, provided input and support in preparing this meeting and the contributions for developing the process to build the second phase of the Inter-American Educational Agenda 2022 to 2027 and the methodology that we adopted today. Therefore, on behalf of the Inter-American Education Committee, I would like to thank all of you for your support with this endeavor. Excuse me. Do we have any feedback or any intervention that any delegation would like to make at this time before we close this session of the meeting? If no, I would like to proceed directly to the fifth plenary session. Colleagues, as defined in the annotated agenda, it is expected to agree during this meeting on the topics to be considered by the Ministers of Education when we meet next year for the 11th Inter-American Meeting of Ministers of Education. We already considered the topic being towards building a new educational hemispheric pact in the context of change. This theme is being considered for the ministerial meeting, and I would like to consult and to get a consensus from you, if you agree with it. Do we have anyone wishing to make a comment on the proposed theme? At this time, I do not see any delegations asking for the floor. If the committee then agrees with this theme for the 11th Inter-American Meeting of the Ministers of Education, the theme shall be, and I will quote, towards building a new educational hemispheric pact in context of change. Now that we have agreed on the topic for the 11th Inter-American Meeting of Ministers of Education, pursuant to item 8 of Annex 1 to the General Guidelines for Ministerial Level Sectoral Processes within the framework of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, I encourage member states to indicate their interest in hosting the ministerial event in 2022. Do we have any delegation that wishes to register an interest in hosting the ministerial event in 2022?
Minister Argentina is requesting the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Perdón.
I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Indeed, we are pleased to announce that it is the intention of the Republic of Argentina and its government to host the 11th Inter-American Meeting of Ministers of Education in 2022, and we can only hope that the health context in our country and indeed in the region at large makes it possible for the meeting to be in person, so that we can indeed fine-tune our common guidelines for the second phase of this Inter-American educational agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And consistent with my appreciation for your acceptance to be chair of the committee, I once again thank you for offering your beautiful country of Argentina to be the host of the next meeting. We appreciate the offer of the government of Argentina, and I propose that we accept it and agree to hold the 11th Inter-American meeting of Ministers of Education in Argentina in 2022. And should the epidemiological situation permit, I would love if it were a face-to-face meeting. If there are no comments, it is so agreed that the meeting, the 11th Inter-American meeting of Ministers of Education, shall be held and hosted by Argentina in 2022. Thank you once again, Minister. We will inform accordingly to the Inter-American Council for Integral Development to convene the ministerial meeting when the specific venue and dates are confirmed. Once again, thank you. This now brings us to the end of this session, and we will proceed directly into the 6th plenary session, other matters or any other business. I wish to now offer the floor to any delegation wishing to bring any other matter to the attention of the committee. Do we have any delegations who wish to raise any issue on the floor at this time? I see no requests for the floor. And if that is the case, I wish to thank you, colleagues, for yesterday and for our period this morning, where I believe we held a very fruitful and productive meeting. We touched on many topics that I believe are all timely. There are a few that stood out in my mind, and I must admit that during my presentation, which spoke about the vulnerability of specific groups as it relates to access to ICT, I was a little nervous, and I felt somewhat that perhaps Antigua and Barbuda may be standing alone, or this may be a unique situation to Antigua and Barbuda. But having heard all of the intervention, having heard all of the comments, it made me recognize very clearly that this was a problem not unique to Antigua and Barbuda, but one that is being experienced throughout our hemisphere. And I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences and sharing how you have sought to mitigate that challenge. I can tell immediately that there are some of your suggestions that we will seek to implement in Antigua and Barbuda, notwithstanding our improving epidemiological situation. I believe some of these interventions can really persist post-COVID. Additionally, I want to thank all of you for your support for Antigua and Barbuda over the past 3 years as chair of this committee. And we also in Antigua and Barbuda would like to once again give our commitment to the Minister of Education of Argentina and the Vice Minister of the committee, the Minister of Education from Ecuador, our continued support for the committee. Director, thank you and your secretariat for all the hard work that you have done to prepare us for this meeting. The support that you have given to me and to Antigua and Barbuda has been quite invaluable, and we appreciate the consistency and the commitment with which you produce good quality work. Thank you very much, and please convey my thank yous and my appreciation to the rest of your team. I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to say as we close, Director. And I see a hand being raised. If you may, Director, kindly allow me to recognize the delegate from the United States of America to the floor before you give your comments. United States, you have the floor.
Yes, well, good morning to everybody. The U.S. delegation just wanted to take a brief moment before this meeting adjourns to first and foremost, Mr. Chair, recognize your leadership and the incredible work that your office and your department and your country has done over these past few years. As you've noted very correctly, it's been a difficult few years, not in the least for the pandemic over the past year, which has greatly changed the landscape of our work together, as you noted. We've also experienced, obviously, many other difficulties in our hemisphere related to economic challenges, political challenges, weather-related challenges, climate change, a lot of significant barriers that we've had to overcome. But our delegation recognizes your leadership during this difficult time and looks forward to continuing to work with you and the other delegations during the next phase. We'd also like to recognize the incredible work that has been undertaken by the Secretariat during this time. It's very readily apparent from the paper and the documentation and all of the coordination that is required to make these meetings take place and to organize them. So I'd like to recognize the department and Jesus and all of your team and Cecilia and everybody. So Mr. Chair, thanks once again from our delegation, and thanks to all of the other delegations for their very relevant contributions during this week's meeting, and we look forward to continuing to work with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. Do we have any other delegations that wish to have a final intervention before we adjourn this meeting? I see none. Director, I would love to give you the opportunity to have some final remarks prior to the adjournment. The floor is yours, sir.
Muchas gracias, Ministro.
Thank you very much, Minister. We could hardly adjourn this meeting without taking the opportunity to express to you our very sincere thanks for your leadership, for your insight, for your hard work over these 3 years, which has allowed this important Inter-American Committee on Education to reach the milestone place we now find ourselves in. And thank you very much for everything you have done to get us here. I, on behalf of the Technical Secretariat within the OAS, can only remind you that we are very much working in sync with all of you. It's not just our work. It is a common endeavor, and your very dedicated work, your ongoing interest, not to mention your significant knowledge of the field, has made this possible, has made our contribution possible. And I can only hope that the year before us, 2022, will bode a very bright future for us, not least in our being able to benefit on an ongoing basis from your guidance and your leadership to make all of our work better and more effective. I don't know, Luis, if it is possible now. It would appear that there was a problem with the connection of the minister. Yes, says the technical expert. I'm afraid we don't see the connection of the minister. So, says Jesus, could we just, Chair, give us just a few minutes to see whether our new chairman can connect or whether the connection is in fact lost? Thank you.
I think I'm back. Yes, I was able to hear everything, but I could not respond. So thank you very much for your kind words, Director. And I must once again reiterate the support that you and your team has offered has been overwhelming and very much appreciated. Thank you so much. I believe that there are no more requests for the floor. And if this is so, colleagues, I wish to thank you once again for your participation over the past 2 days. I wish you good health. I wish you strength. And I wish you, when it comes around, a very happy Yuletide season as we celebrate Christmas. And I look forward to meeting and conversing and dialoguing with all of you as we go into a very busy first quarter of 2022. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Luis, podemos cerrar la sesión. Muchísimas gracias por su apoyo.
Por favor, un placer.
Thank you, Luis, for your support. I think we can adjourn the session. Thank you.